Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
You bet.
And today we're tackling a really interesting one. We're going to be looking at the kind of the global debate surrounding face-covering garments.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be using Switzerland's recent ban as kind of a jumping-off point.
Yeah.
And this obviously has some strong parallels to what's happening here in India. We've seen the whole hijab ban controversy play out in Karnataka.
Right.
Sparking a lot of discourse and, a lot of legal battles as well.
Yeah, and this is something that, whether you're a UPSC aspirant or just someone, following global events, this is something that is incredibly relevant.
Absolutely.
For a variety of reasons.
Yeah, so this is going to be a really good deep dive to kind of get a more holistic picture of what's happening.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, let's head over to Switzerland.
Okay.
So they just implemented this Burqa ban just this month, actually, on January 1st, 2025.
Right.
And it's got a lot of people talking.
Yeah, it's really interesting how they've crafted it.
Yeah.
So it targets public spaces and private buildings
okay.
that are accessible to the public.
Mm-hmm.
So it casts a pretty wide net in terms of where the ban is applicable.
All right.
But here's the thing. It's not really a blanket ban because there's this whole list of exceptions, and it's surprisingly long.
Hold on. Exceptions to a ban. So it's like
Yeah.
you can't wear it, but you can wear it in these certain situations.
Yeah, and that's where things get a little bit tricky. I mean, it's like, think about it. Face coverings are still allowed on planes, in places of worship, even for artistic purposes.
Interesting.
They've got exceptions for health and safety reasons.
Okay.
Weather conditions, native customs, and even personal protection if you get prior approval.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So, okay, how does the Swiss ban and how they've kind of crafted this,
Right.
how does this help our UPSC folks out there who might be, studying for their exams?
Well, this is something that, it's happening in real time. Right. So imagine you get a question on individual liberty versus state power.
Okay.
This is a real world example of how that tension is playing out. It also throws light on how secularism functions in a diverse society.
Yeah.
And then even when you think about it, Switzerland's role in international relations, this ban has implications for that as well.
So it's not just about like memorizing,
Right.
Okay, Switzerland has a ban on this, but it's about how does this event connect to all these other kind of bigger picture themes
exactly.
that might pop up on the exam?
You got it.
Okay, very cool. So we've talked about Switzerland, but obviously Switzerland is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Similar bans, although, with varying degrees of restrictions, exist in other countries too.
Absolutely.
France actually was the first European nation to kind of jump on this bandwagon back in 2011. And then since then, we've seen countries like Belgium, China, Sri Lanka, and even Tajikistan
Right.
implement similar bans. Wait, Tajikistan, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
Why? Why is that significant?
Well, think about it. Tajikistan has a predominantly Muslim population.
Right.
So this tells us that this is an issue that kind of transcends, just demographics or religious demographics.
Right.
It goes into deeper waters, cultural identity,
Okay.
societal norms, national security concerns.
Wow. Okay. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So it really is more than just like,
Exactly.
they're banning it because,
Right.
this is a country that doesn't have a large Muslim population.
Right.
So it's something deeper than that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's, I think it's time we turn our attention to the ongoing hijab movement in Iran.
Sure.
This is a really powerful example of how, clothing choices can be intertwined with social and political movements.
Absolutely. And it's something that's been going on for decades. Ever since the 1979 revolution, the hijab has been mandatory for women in Iran. And that has led to, decades of resistance. The image of the girl of Engeleb Street waving her white headscarf on a stick, that became a really iconic symbol of defiance against this enforced dress code.
And then, of course, more recently we have the tragic death of Mahsa Amini.
Right.
She was allegedly detained for violating hijab rules. And her death really sparked outrage and ignited nationwide protests.
Yeah, and those protests have kind of evolved into something bigger, haven't they?
Yeah.
It's no longer just about the hijab. It's a cry for women's rights, a demand for personal freedoms, this yearning for agency in their own lives.
It's a really powerful reminder that, individual choices can become these catalysts for larger social change.
Yeah.
But how has the Iranian government responded to these protests?
Well, unfortunately, with a pretty heavy hand,
Right.
we've seen fines, imprisonments, a worrying escalation of tension.
Okay.
And it kind of highlights that constant tug of war between individual liberties and state control, which is a theme that, echoes globally.
100%. And that brings us back to India.
Right.
Where the hijab debate has really taken center stage.
Yeah.
Particularly with the legal battles that have been happening in Karnataka.
Right.
It's a tricky legal landscape with these conflicting interpretations of religious freedom bumping up against educational policies.
Right. So let's unpack some of these key cases that have come up.
Okay.
So I think a good starting point is the 2016 Amna bin Bashir versus CBSE case.
Okay.
So in this case, the Kerala High Court recognized the hijab as an essential religious practice.
Okay.
For Muslim women, however, they also upheld the CBSE dress code.
Okay.
So allowing for, additional measures to ensure fairness during exams.
So they were kind of trying to strike a balance between like, okay, we recognize, this is an important religious practice.
Right.
But at the same time, the school has the right to implement these guidelines.
Exactly. It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah. For sure.
But then we have the Fatima Tasneem versus State of Kerala case in 2019.
Okay.
So in this case, the court actually sided with a Christian missionary school
Terrific.
that refused to allow 2 girls to wear headscarves.
Wow. Okay.
And so in this instance, the focus shifted to the school's collective rights.
Okay.
And this kind of sparked a debate about where the line is drawn between individual rights and institutional rights.
It's so interesting how we have 2 cases in the same state.
Right.
But with
contrasting interpretations.
Such contrasting interpretations, yeah.
That's fascinating.
And then, of course, we have the situation in Karnataka, which really brought this whole hijab issue to national attention.
Front and center.
Yeah.
So in 2022, the Karnataka High Court upheld the state government's ban on hijabs in pre-university colleges.
Okay.
And their reasoning was that wearing a hijab wasn't considered an essential religious practice.
Right.
Meaning the ban didn't violate the right to religious freedom.
Okay. But this case didn't end there, did it?
No. It went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court delivered a split verdict.
Wow.
So essentially, the 2 judges on the bench couldn't agree on a single outcome.
Okay.
Which means the case now goes to a larger bench. Okay. And basically leaves the legal battle in limbo.
So the legal wrangling continues, and so does the debate within society as well.
Absolutely.
But to really understand this issue in the Indian context, we need to dig into the constitutional framework that underpins it all.
Exactly. So, the Indian Constitution, under Articles 25 to 28, guarantees the right to freedom of religion and a fundamental right.
Okay, let's break down these articles.
Sure.
What do they actually say, and how do they apply to this whole hijab debate?
Okay, so Article 25 is kind of the cornerstone here.
Okay.
It guarantees the freedom of conscience and the right to freely profess, practice, and propagate religion.
Okay.
And this is what we call a negative liberty. The state can't interfere with an individual's religious practices.
So logically, this article should protect the right to wear a hijab.
In theory, yes.
Right.
But like most rights, it's not absolute.
Okay.
Article 25 allows for reasonable restrictions.
Okay.
Which is where things get a little murky.
Yeah.
And to complicate matters further, we have to consider other articles too.
Okay.
So, for example, Article 26 grants freedom to manage religious affairs.
Okay.
So it allows religious denominations to set up and manage institutions for religious and charitable purposes.
Okay.
But subject to public order, morality, and health.
So there's potential for conflict right there.
You got it.
Okay.
Then we have Article 27, which basically prohibits the state from forcing citizens to pay taxes for promoting or maintaining any particular religion. So this reinforces the principle of secularism, which is central to this whole discussion.
Of course.
And lastly, Article 28 deals with religious instruction in educational institutions. And it restricts religious instruction in state-funded or state-recognized institutions unless specifically allowed.
Okay, so we've got these 4 articles.
Yeah.
All related to religious freedom, but with a lot of room for different interpretations, especially when you're talking about a complex situation like this.
Exactly. And to add another layer of complexity, we also have Articles 29 and 30, which safeguard the cultural and educational rights of minorities.
Right.
These often come into play as they emphasize the protection of unique identities and cultural practices.
It sounds like navigating this legal maze would make anyone's head spin.
It's a lot.
And within this framework, we have a whole bunch of arguments both for and against the ban.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's crucial to understand both sides of this story to develop a well-rounded perspective.
Okay.
So let's start with the arguments that support the ban.
Okay.
And remember, we're just presenting these neutrally. We're not advocating for any particular side.
Right. Of course.
So one common argument revolves around the concept of uniformity and discipline,
Okay.
particularly within educational settings. So the idea is that enforcing a dress code promotes a sense of unity.
Right.
And fosters discipline, creating an environment free from distractions or divisions caused by religious attire.
So it's about maintaining kind of a level playing field and a sense of shared identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there are arguments related to gender equality.
Okay.
So critics of the hijab and similar practices often view them as tools of patriarchy, arguing that they perpetuate gender inequality and restrict women's freedom of choice and expression.
That's definitely something we hear a lot in these debates.
It is.
Yeah.
It ties into another argument, which is the importance of integration into society.
Okay.
So proponents of the ban argue that prohibiting such practices can encourage integration into the broader society, minimizing potential alienation or segregation that might arise from visible religious markers.
So it's about promoting like a sense of national unity rather than emphasizing religious differences.
You got it. Okay. Then, of course, there's the legal argument, which emphasizes that fundamental rights are not absolute. So the right to religion under Article 25, while important, cannot override other fundamental rights or societal interests. So the argument is that, especially in government-funded institutions, reasonable restrictions can be placed on religious practices if they clash with broader educational goals or public order.
So it's all about finding that right balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, we have security concerns, which have gained a lot of traction in recent years. Proponents of bans often point to the need to prevent anonymity, arguing that it can hinder identification and create potential security risks. They also worry about the misuse of such garments to conceal weapons or other prohibited items.
Right, and they often cite instances like the 2019 Easter bombings in Sri Lanka, where the perpetrators allegedly used burqas to blend in.
Right. Those events definitely fueled the security argument.
Okay, so we've looked at the arguments in favor of the ban. Now let's kind of flip the coin and explore the other side.
Okay.
What are some concerns raised by those who oppose these bans?
Sure.
All ears, tell me more.
Well, I think for many, it boils down to religious freedom.
Okay.
So opponents of the ban argue that Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, it clearly guarantees the right to practice and profess one's religion.
Right.
And they see banning the hijab or burqa as a direct infringement on this fundamental right.
So for them, it's about upholding like a core constitutional right.
Exactly. They argue that imposing such a ban sends a message of exclusion, potentially creating a sense of alienation and discrimination against Muslim women who choose to wear the hijab as an expression of their faith. And this, they say, could exacerbate social tensions rather than promoting harmony.
So it's also about respecting individual choice and autonomy.
Exactly, and this leads to another concern, the potential impact on education. Right. Opponents of the ban worry about the negative consequences for female students from conservative backgrounds. They argue that restricting the hijab could discourage these students from attending schools or colleges, ultimately hindering their education and empowerment.
That's a really good point, because we know that, Muslim girls in many states already face lower school attendance rates compared to their Hindu counterparts.
Right.
And so a ban could widen that gap and create further barriers
to
their educational progress.
It's a critical consideration. And beyond the practical implications, opponents of the ban also highlight the broader societal impact. They argue that such bans can contribute to the marginalization of Muslim communities and reinforce negative stereotypes.
It's about the risk of creating like a sense of otherness. And undermining their sense of belonging within society.
Precisely, the argument is for respecting diversity and recognizing that a truly inclusive society makes space for different forms of religious expression as long as they don't infringe upon the rights of others. Okay,
so we've laid out both sides of this really complex debate. Arguments for the ban, arguments against. It's clear that there's no easy answer, and the legal battle is far from over. But I think this deep dive has given us a much deeper understanding.
Absolutely.
Which is super helpful for our UPSC aspirants who need to be well-versed in these issues.
I mean, what's fascinating is how this debate kind of mirrors global trends. You know, we're seeing similar conversations happening in countries all over the world, each grappling with the same questions.
Yeah.
How do we balance individual freedoms with societal values? How do we address security concerns without compromising fundamental rights?
It's a reminder that these issues are not just isolated incidents.
Right.
They're part of a larger interconnected conversation about identity, belonging, and the role of religion in the modern world.
Sure.
And for our UPSC aspirants, this is crucial understanding. India's stance on the hijab or burqa debate requires understanding the global context.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Countries like France and Switzerland, with their secular frameworks, have adopted a much stricter approach.
Right.
But then you have countries like the UK and the US, where religious expression tends to be more openly accommodated. So where does India fit within this spectrum?
That's the question.
That's the big question. It's almost like a case study in comparative governance.
It is.
You know, analyzing different approaches and their implications.
Exactly.
That's definitely something our UPSC folks can use in their mains answers.
Absolutely.
And don't forget the historical dimension, too.
Right.
You know, understanding the evolution of secularism in India, the debates surrounding the Uniform Civil Code, the interplay between personal laws and constitutional rights. All of this feeds into the current hijab or burqa debate.
Right. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Yeah.
Each layer reveals a new complexity, a new perspective.
It's exactly. And for our listeners preparing for the UPSC, remember, this exam isn't just about rote learning.
Right.
It's about critical thinking. It's about connecting the dots. It's about seeing the big picture.
Absolutely.
So how can our aspiring civil servants connect the dots on this particular issue? What are some of the key takeaways they should keep in mind?
Well, I think first and foremost, remember that the hijab or burqa debate is not a simple black and white issue. It's nuanced, it's multifaceted. There are valid arguments on both sides.
And it's an evolving issue.
Yeah.
The legal battles are ongoing, the societal debate continues, and the global landscape is constantly shifting.
Exactly. So staying informed is crucial. Familiarize yourself with the key constitutional articles, the relevant legal precedents, the arguments for and against the ban, and the different approaches taken by other countries.
It's about building a comprehensive understanding, not just memorizing facts and figures.
Absolutely. And practice articulating those arguments in a clear, concise, and objective manner. Remember, the UPSC examiners are looking for candidates who can analyze complex issues with nuance and present balanced perspectives.
So delve deeper, research further, and most importantly, stay curious.
Yeah.
The more you engage with these issues, the better equipped you'll be to tackle them both in the exam hall and in your future roles as policymakers and leaders. And we are back for the third part of our deep dive today, looking at hijab and burqa bans.
Yeah, it's been a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, very nuanced, very complex.
Yeah, a lot of layers to unpack here.
And, you know, as we wrap things up, I think it's important to kind of leave our listeners with something to ponder.
Right.
A question to kind of encourage them to, you know, think critically.
Yeah.
And connect the dots, because after all, that's what the UPSC is all about, right?
Absolutely a final takeaway, a final aha moment.
Exactly. So here's the question. How can societies balance individual religious expression with broader societal values and security concerns?
Ooh, that's a good one.
In our increasingly interconnected world?
Yeah, that question really hits at the heart of the matter. You know, it pushes us to move beyond these simplistic solutions and really grapple with the complexities of living in diverse, pluralistic societies.
Yeah.
Societies like India.
Exactly. And it's a question that, you know, policymakers, legal experts, even everyday citizens are wrestling with, both here in India and globally.
100%.
I mean, think about it. How do we ensure that individual rights are protected without compromising the safety and well-being of the community as a whole?
Yeah.
How do we navigate these cultural sensitivities while upholding the principles of equality and secularism?
It's a tough one.
These are tough questions with no easy answers.
Right.
But for our UPSC aspirants, engaging with these questions is crucial.
Absolutely.
You know, it's about understanding the different perspectives, analyzing the historical context, and developing those critical thinking skills that are going to be so essential for navigating these complex issues.
100%. I mean, the UPSC isn't just about memorizing facts and figures. It's about developing a nuanced understanding of the world around us, analyzing complex problems, and formulating well-reasoned solutions. And that's exactly what we've tried to do today in this deep dive.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for all our listeners out there, especially those gearing up for the UPSC, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic.
Yeah.
Delve deeper into the arguments, engage with diverse perspectives, form your own informed opinions.
Right.
Remember, the journey of learning doesn't end with this deep dive.
It's just the beginning.
This is just the beginning.
Yeah.
And as you continue your UPSC preparation, remember those skills we've talked about today. Critical thinking, nuanced analysis, informed debate. These are the tools that are going to set you apart.
Yeah.
They're valuable not just for the exam, but for your future careers as policymakers and leaders shaping the destiny of our nation.
100%.
So keep those minds sharp.
Keep learning.
Those curiosity levels high.
Stay curious.
And that commitment to knowledge burning bright. And if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your fellow UPSC aspirants.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring.